everyone, welcome to my channel, HFY Beyond Terra. This channel is all about HFY and sci-fi stories. Now, let's start the story.
Plasma fire rattled through the ruined arteries of Kepler Station. A sound that never stopped, like thunder trapped in metal. Eli Navarro pressed his shoulder to a buckled bulkhead and checked his rifle by feel, not sight. Smoke clung to everything. Thick as wet cloth, his ammo counter blinked a blunt truth. 12 rounds. 3 years into the war between the Earth Defense Corps and the Zephyr, Eli had learned what 12 meant. It meant don't miss. It meant don't hope for reinforcements. It meant you were already counting the ways a day could end. The corridor lights stuttered, dying in pulses. In each flicker, the station changed shape, hallways becoming jagged caverns, shadows turning into bodies. Eli kept low, stepping over a cable that hissed with exposed current and round a pipe that vomited steam into the air. Far off, heavy footsteps thumped through the wreckage, not human boots. Zephyr patrols moved with a slow certainty, like predators that didn't need to run. Eli had been a demolitions specialist before the war, the one who knew which support strut mattered and which door could be persuaded with a charge. Now that knowledge only told him one thing. Kepler Station was coming apart. Structural groans rose from the bones of the place, deep and aching, and every tremor shook loose new dust. His captain's last order had been clear: fall back to the escape pods. Eli had tried, but Battle didn't care about orders. A blast had cut the corridor in half, separating him from his squad. He'd stumbled through smoke and screens and collapsing metal until the radio became useless static, and every path looked the same. He was alone. He climbed over a mound of shattered plating, his gloves scraping against glassy shards of insulation. That was when he heard it. At first it was so faint he thought it was a pipe venting an odd whistle in the chaos. Then it came, again, softer and sharper at once. A cry, not a soldier's shout, not a wounded adult's groan. A small, broken sound, trembling with pain. Eli froze. His training snapped into place like a lock. Ignore it. The Zephyr were famous for baiting decoys, sound lures, hologram mirages. They didn't fight the way humans did. They fought like a tide, patient, cruel, inevitable. But the crying was wrong for a trick, too raw, too unsteady, too real. Eli swallowed the taste of smoke and forced his legs to move. The sound led him to what the station maps once called a storage annex, now barely a room. The ceiling had caved inward, beams crossing like the ribs of some dead animal. In the dim light, beyond a narrow gap of twisted metal, something small shifted. Eli raised his rifle. A figure flinched back, and a face blue-skinned, crystalline featured caught the flicker of the dying lights. Large eyes, not the cold, predatory gold he'd seen in Zephyr's soldiers, but wide, wet with fear. A child. Ellie's breath snagged. She couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, small even by human standards. Her clothing was torn and smeared with dark blood. One thin leg was pinned under a smaller beam, and she trembled as if the metal itself hurt to touch. Eli had never seen a Zephyr child. In propaganda, the enemy was always tall, armored, and merciless. This girl wasn't merciless. She was terrified. She saw him and tried to crawl away. But pain dragged a little sound from her throat. Her language came in hurried syllables, pleading or warning. He couldn't tell. Eli lowered the muzzle of his rifle by an inch. Then another. Slowly, he set it down. He lifted both hands, palms open. "Hey," he murmured, voice rough from smoke. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood what hands without a weapon meant. Eli crouched near the beam trapping her. His instincts screamed at him to hurry, to get out, to stop being stupid. But the child's leg was wedged tight, and the blood on her clothing looked fresh. He tested the beam. Heavy. Too heavy for a normal lift unless adrenaline had anything to say about it. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "This might sting." He braced his boots, gripped the metal, and heaved. Pain flared through his shoulders. The beam rose a fraction. Eli grunted, shaking, and lifted again until he felt the smallest give. The child pulled her leg free with a gasp and scrambled backward into the shadows, staring at him as if he'd transformed. Eli exhaled, then heard the thing that turned his blood cold. Footsteps. Close. Multiple. Fast. A patrol. Eli snatched up his rifle and leaned toward the doorway. Through the smoke, Forzephari's soldiers advanced down the hall, lean, glowing faintly with that unsettling inner light. Their faces were angular and hard, eyes bright gold and merciless. These were not children. These were hunters. Eli backed into the room, heart punching his ribs. The storage space was too small, too choked with debris to hide well. Fight, 4-on-1 with 12 rounds. Hide, nowhere. Run, not with the collapsing station and the child's injured leg. He looked at her. She was trying to stand, jaw clenched, but her leg buckled. Her eyes flicked to the doorway, then to Eli. Fear layered over confusion. If shooting started, she'd be shredded by stray plasma. Eli made a decision so quickly it felt like someone else made it for him. He dropped his rifle before the child could react. He moved swift, careful, and wrapped an arm around her small shoulders, pulling her down beneath the fallen beams where the shadows were thickest. Then he lowered himself over her, covering her completely. The child struggled once. A soft, panicked squirm. Eli whispered, "SHH." The word didn't matter. The tone did. She froze, trembling, small hands clutching the fabric of his uniform like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. The footsteps stopped outside the room. Zephyri voices snapped back and forth quick, sharp. Eli couldn't understand them, but the meaning was clear. Search or move on. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. A soldier stepped inside. Weapon raised. Eli held his breath. The child's heart beat against his chest like a trapped bird. The soldier's gaze swept over the wreckage, and then, inevitably, it found the movement telly's shoulder shifting a millimeter as he fought the urge to cough. The Zephyri sucked in a breath and barked a command. The other three rushed in. One pointed his weapon. Another spoke in broken, standard, human, surrender. Eli didn't answer. He pressed himself down harder, shielding the girl. Someone behind the first soldier said something that sounded like restraint prisoners, maybe, but anger overrode caution. The lead soldier's eyes narrowed with hatred. This one. The Zephyr hissed. Ends. The plasma rifle fired. The first bolt struck Ellie's shoulder. A white-hot spear. His entire body lit with pain. Another hit his back, then another. The air filled with the smell of scorched cloth and skin. Eli didn't move. He didn't roll. He didn't scream, only clenched his jaw until he tasted blood. Bolts kept coming, each impact a burning hammer. Under him, the child shook but stayed silent. Finally, the firing stopped. Ellie's vision blurred, the world dimming at the edges. Voices drifted like they were underwater. A boot nudged his ribs. Pain exploded, alive. Someone said, "Barely, leave him." Another voice replied, "He will die." The footsteps retreated, but a pause at the doorway tightened. Ellie's chest, a suspicious tone, movement. Under him, Eli forced himself to go limp, to become dead weight, to be a wall. A second soldier answered, dismissive, just debris, station failing. Then they were gone. Silence returned, broken only by the station's groaning and the child's careful breath. Minutes later, maybe seconds, Eli felt small fingers touch his cheek. He opened his eyes to see golden irises shining with something he couldn't name. Confusion. Awe. A question too big for a child. She spoke a single word, soft as a falling feather. Eli didn't understand her language, but he understood her meaning. Why? He managed a thin, broken smile. Because, he rasped, "You're just a kid." He woke to gentle shaking. His body felt like it had been dipped in fire. His shoulders burned. His back pulsed with raw heat beneath melted fabric. He blinked through haze and saw the child, crouched beside him, tearing a strip of cloth from her own damaged clothing. She pressed it to his wound with hands that trembled. Eli tried to sit up and failed. A gasp ripping free, the child made a worried sound, then offered him a small bottle water, salvaged from somewhere. Eli drank a mouthful and nearly wept. "We can't stay," he murmured. Though he knew she couldn't follow the words, he pointed toward the corridor, then to the fallen ceiling above them. Another distant shudder answered. The child watched. His gestures then nodded, more instinct than understanding. They moved. Eli crawled, dragging himself through rubble, stopping every few meters to breathe through the pain. The child limped beside him, refusing to leave his reach. Sometimes she put a hand on his arm, as if she could pull him forward by sheer will. After what felt like hours, Eli found a maintenance hatch half hidden behind a tangle of pipes. He shoved debris aside, gritting his teeth as his wounds screamed, and forced the hatch open. A narrow tunnel yawned into darkness. The child climbed in first. Eli followed, pulling the pipes back into place behind them like a makeshift door. The tunnels led down to a forgotten storage compartment, cold, dark, quiet. Quiet felt like a miracle. Among overturned crates, Eli found emergency supplies, water, a few nutrient bars, and a basic medical kit meant for minor burns. Minor. He laughed once, a dry, painful sound. He opened the kit with shaking hands and tried to reach his back, but the movement made stars burst behind his eyes. The child watched him struggle. Then she pointed at the patches. Then at his wounds. Eli hesitated. Trusting an enemy child to treat him felt absurd. But she had already trusted him first. He handed her a patch. Her fingers were careful as she pressed it to his shoulder. Cool medicine seeped into the burn, easing the worst edge of pain. Eli exhaled through clenched teeth. When she finished, she pointed to herself. Lyra, she said clearly. Eli tapped his chest. Eli, she tried to copy it. Eagerly, close enough. Over the next day, they built a language out of necessity gestures, shared food, repeated words. She taught him a few HFY syllables. He taught her yes, no, safe, hurt, sometimes, when Eli asked about her family. Lyra's gaze drifted downward and she whispered, a word he recognized even without translation. Mama. Then Ellie's fever came. The burns were infected. His thoughts became slippery. He drifted in and out of consciousness, waking to Lyra's small hands offering water, waking to her voice humming something gentle in her language, waking to the cold truth that he was dying. On the third day, voices echoed in the tunnel's HFY. Voices, but not sharp with anger, worried, searching. Lyra's head snapped up. Hope ignited in her eyes. Mama, she whispered, and the words sounded like prayer. Eli tried to push himself upright. His body refused. Go, he croaked, pointing toward the hatch. Go, Lyra. She shook her head hard. Tears gathered, bright as glass. No, she said in broken standard, struggling for the words. Stay. Together. Then lights flooded the storage compartment as the pipes shifted aside. Tall blue figures entered, scanning weapons raised until they saw Lyra. A rush of voices. Surprise. Relief. Lyra spoke fast, pointing to Eli, to her own leg, to the patches on his wounds. She repeated his name, Eli, and a word Eli recognized. From her earlier lessons, something close to save. Strong hands lifted him. Eli tried to fight, but the fever stole his strength. A HFY officer leaned close, speaking halting standard. Human, injured. We help. Ellie's vision blurred as Lyra was picked up too, still reaching for him, still watching to make sure they didn't hurt him. The last thing he saw before darkness was her golden eyes steady, fierce, refusing to let him disappear. Alone? 3 months later, Admiral Zara Lethus stood at the window of her office on Zephos Prime, watching sunlight fracture through the capital's crystal gardens. From above, everything looked peaceful, towers gleaming, water channels shining like ribbons. But the war still raged out in the outer systems. Lyra was home, safe, physically healed, and yet changed. She spoke less. She stared into distance as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. At first, she refused to talk about Kepler Station. Then, piece by piece, the story emerged. The human who gave her water, who shared food, who carried her through wreckage. Even while bleeding and burning, Zara listened with a soldier's caution. A human might protect a child for leverage, for bargaining, for strategy. But Lyra's descriptions didn't sound like strategy 2 weeks later, at dinner, Lyra set down her utensil and looked up with solemn gold eyes. "Mama," she said quietly, "Eli saved me." Zara's hand stilled. Lyra explained the patrol, the shots, the way the human's body became a shield. Zara felt the room tilt. A human soldier had taken plasma fire meant for her child. In Zephyr tradition, such an act invoked an ancient Bon Velthar, older than spaceflight, older than their recorded empires. A life freely risked for a child created a debt that could not be repaid with gifts or favors. The only repayment was kinship, family. Zara summoned the rescue captain, Vex Corin, and demanded every detail. He confirmed what Lyra said and added the medical scans. The burn pattern on the human's back was unmistakable. "Is he alive?" Zara asked. "Yes," Corin said, "but failing. Our medics stabilized him. The cellular damage, we can't fully repair it." Zara spent the night reading the old laws until her eyes ached. The text didn't mention species, only intention, only sacrifice. By dawn, her decision was made. She would do something unheard of. She would contact Earth Defense Command not for exchange, not for threats, but for honor. At Neutral Station Omega, Zara met Earth's delegation in a room as plain as a confession. Earth officers arrived stiff, suspicious. Zara didn't blame them. Trust was a scarce resource in wartime. She placed the scans on the table. Proof, pattern, testimony. Then she explained Velthar, the sacred debt, the obligation to take the protector into her household as bloodkin, to protect and provide until the end of his life. The humans stared, as if she'd offered to split the galaxy in half. One of their admirals, Mara Sullivan, graying and sharp-eyed, finally spoke. "Why come to us? Because the human is dying." Zara answered, "And I can save him. Our medicine can repair plasma-based cellular collapse. But there's a condition," the human intelligence officer said. Wary, Zara didn't flinch. "The treatment requires compatibility rights. It changes him. Longer life, new senses. It cannot be undone." Suspicion hardened the air. Zara held her gaze steady. "This is not a weapon. It is repayment, a sacred obligation." After a long silence, Admiral Sullivan nodded once. "We speak to him. He chooses." Zara agreed. Eli Navarro lay in a clean prison infirmary on Arcturus 7, looking more ghost than soldier. His skin carried the faint, sickly marbling of failing cells. He stood when Admiral Sullivan entered, but the effort shook him. She asked what happened at Kepler. He told it plainly. No heroics, no speeches. When she asked why, Ellie's answer didn't change. She was a kid. He whispered, scared, hurt. "I couldn't let her die." Then came the choice: accept Zara's bond and leave human space behind or refuse and die slowly. Alone, in a cell, Eli stared at the floor for a long time. Finally he said, "If it helps end this, if it helps even a little, I'll do it." Admiral Sullivan's eyes softened with pride and sorrow. "Then make it count." Lyra met him on the medical ship, running into his arms like the war had never existed. She spoke fast, half Zephyry, half broken standard. laughing and crying at once. Zara watched, and something in her chest unclenched when Eli faced her, exhausted but steady. She asked the question her laws required. Do you freely accept Velthar and join my household? Eli swallowed. I do. Then you are kin, Zara said simply. Welcome home. The treatment was brutal. It rewrote the damage the war had carved into him and left him altered, stronger, slower to age, able to sense the edges of Zephyri emotion like faint music. When he finally stood in the crystal gardens of Zepho's prime, breathing clean air without pain, he understood that he had crossed a line no soldier ever trained for. He wasn't just surviving. He was becoming a bridge. Over time, his presence softened small edges. First one rescued group of civilians, one restrained commander, one prisoner exchange that didn't end in brutality. Then bigger things followed. Rules of engagement, shared medical corridors, talks that didn't collapse into threats. 2 years later, formal negotiations began. Eli stood between two admirals who once would have ordered each other's deaths, and beside Lyra, no longer a frightened child, but a young diplomat with steady, golden eyes. When the treaty was signed, the room didn't erupt in cheers. It released a breath it had been holding for years. Afterward, Eli built schools where human and Zephyri children learned side by side. He watched Lyra teach them the first lesson that mattered. Not tactics, not history, names. Because it was harder to hate someone once you knew what they were. Cold, and sometimes peace began the same way his story had begun, in the broken halls of Kepler Station, with one person deciding that a child, any child, was worth protecting.